Alrighty, hello you guys, welcome to my Sisters of Stone Death deck tech. Now before we get into it, I want to go ahead and apologize that it's been a minute since I've uploaded. Honestly, the last couple of sets just really weren't doing it for me. And then I wanted to make sure I spent a good time investigating how to build a good Sisters of Stone Death deck for you. That being said, I'm running it light on tutors, and I am keeping combos out of the deck, as those are things I just don't like to run, and I'm tired of repeating that my decks have Soul Ring and Arcane Signet in them. So from here on out, you just know that, okay? Alright, let's get into it. Alrighty, let's go ahead and begin things by going over what the Sisters of Stone Death themselves do. Now, they are an 8 mana creature comprised of 2 forest, 2 swamp, and 4 for a legendary creature Gorgon with a power and toughness of 7/5 with 3 different activated abilities. The first, costing a forest, reads target creature blocks Sisters of Stone Death this turn if able. Then I can play a green and a swamp to exile target creature blocking or blocked by Sisters of Stone Death. And then I can pay a swamp and 2 to put a creature card exiled with Sisters of Stone Death onto the battlefield under your control. Our commander is quite a beautiful mana sink, allowing us to swing big and board wipe our opponents, then stealing the best pieces of their puzzles. However, she does cost a lot of mana, so our deck is built around this. So with that in mind, let's take a dive into the Sisters of Stone Death. Now, we can't have a commander as expensive as 8 mana and not go over some of our mana base. So we are running 35 lands total in this deck, but there's 3 lands in particular that I want to specifically shout out, which is Cavern of Souls, a great card that's going to ensure our commander hits the field when we cast her. In addition, we're going to be running Plaza of Heroes, which will protect our commander when she's in play, and Yavimaya Hollow, which will also allow us to protect our commander while she's in play. These 3 pieces are incredibly important, and they're land, which means it's incredibly difficult for our opponents to interact with them. Alongside these lands, though, of course, we're running a traditional Golgari package, alongside, of course, a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, a Castle Locthwain, a Besiege, and everybody's favorite Verdant Catacombs. With our mana base discussed, though, let's take a look at the real thing that will be heavy lifting, and that's going to be our mana ramp package. Now, the ramp package in this deck is large, with 3 major categories. The first being cards that allow us to actually search our library for lands and putting them into play. The second category being cards that allow us to put extra lands into play, and the third being things that generate mana in a secondary way. We have 12 cards that will allow us to search our library for lands and put them into play, 7 that let us put extra lands into play, and 4 that allow us to generate mana in a backup way. I'm not going to cover everything, but there are a few that I specifically wanting to point out, starting with Sporocyst, which is a XX and a forest for a 0/0 with Ravenous and Defender, and when it enters the battlefield, we'll search our library for up to X basic land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This card is excellent. It is flexible, allowing us to either get 1 land for 3, get 2 lands for 5, so on and so forth. It could potentially give us card draw if we pump it big enough, and it is an excellent defender. In addition, we also have Wood Elves, Death Sprout, and Ulvenwald Hydra that are ways for us to protect our board state in the early games and continue to ramp. In addition to that, we have Oracle of Moldiah, Exploration, Broken Bond, and I do want to take a moment to highlight one of the new cards from Phyrexia, Green Sun's Eclipse. While I'm not going to be putting in any other cards from the new set as we are still in spoiler season, I saw that and I figured immediately that was going to go into the deck. And then in our last category of mana ramps, we have stuff like Talisman of Resilience, Expedition Map, Summerwald Sage, and Calling Ritual. All things that will allow us to generate either big swaths of mana or tutor for the specific lands that we're looking for. With that in mind, and now all our lands set up, we are going to need lots of card draw to replenish our hand. So let's take a look at that next. Now in this deck we have 10 cards that are able to draw us more cards. And in order of mana value, our first two are Knight's Whispers and Sylvan Library, two respective card draw staples for their colors. Then we have Phyrexian Arena and Garruk's Uprising, both cards that will certainly net us value as the game continues to go on. Then we have Toski, Bearer of Secrets, who is an indestructible creature that will allow us to draw cards as we continue to beat our opponent's face. Then as we start to scale into the late game, we have cards like Stinging Study, which will draw us an entire new hand at the cost of 8 life, Rishkar's Expertise, Doomweaver, and then towards the upper end we have the legendary Great Henge, and the flexible and incredibly convenient Damnable Pact. With these 10 cards, we should be able to keep our hand full and flowing, so that way the lands continue to pour and the Gorgons begin to slither. Which, speaking of Gorgons, let's get to discussing the Gorgon subtheme we have within our deck. Now, before we start the Gorgon subsection, I want to discuss why we even have a Gorgon subtheme to begin with. While we do have Cavern of Souls that will net us some additional value by playing extra Gorgons, we have two cards in particular that are the reason why, which are Hythonia the Cruel and Kindred Dominance, both of which allowing us to wipe the board of all non-Gorgon creatures, meaning our commander will survive. With that in mind, we also have Visara the Dreadful, a backup legendary Gorgon we can use to fill the slot if our commander keeps getting removed, Keepsake Gorgon, which is a powerful death touch blocker that allows us to remove a creature at instant speed if we need to, while buffing itself, and Reaper of the Wilds, which is a Gorgon that heavily benefits from being alive when we destroy all non-Gorgon creatures. But lastly, we have Archetype of Finality, which is a 2/3 enchantment creature Gorgon that gives our creatures death touch and robs our opponents of having death touch. This Gorgon in particular leans heavy into what our main goal is with our Sisters of Stone Death, which is to make them an unkillable, stoppable machine through creatures that boost them and artifacts and equipments. So let's take a look at what those are now. Now, as stated, our goal with this deck is to make our Sisters of Stone Death an unkillable and unstoppable machine of death. And how do we plan to do that? Well, starting with our Lightning Greaves, which will give them haste and shroud. Champion's Helm will offer a legendary creature hexproof and an additional stat boost. Hammer of Nazan will not only allow us to skirt the equip costs once we have it in play, it also will give our sisters indestructible. Batterskull, which does not need to be equipped right away thanks to it being a living weapon, but also giving the very important keyword of vigilance. Then we have Blackblade Reforged, which should equal certain doom if connects in the later stage of the game. But speaking of certain doom, nothing will guarantee that, like the Vorpal Sword. However, good old-fashioned equipment is not the only way that we're looking to buff our commander. We're also going to be making use of the keyword counters from Ikoria with Slippery Bog Bonder, which has Flash Hexproof to give a creature a hexproof counter, and Daring Fiend Bonder, which allows us to pay 2 to exile it from our graveyard to put an indestructible counter on a creature. I find these to be my preferential way to secure our commander on the board, as it's very difficult typically for players to deal with counters. But aside from counters, we also have 2 enchantments, Whip of Erebos and Gift of Doom, one which gives our creature lifelink, and the other that gives our creature death touch and indestructible. And it's incredibly convenient if you're able to morph our Gift of Doom. As you may remember, morph is a special action, and we can abuse that here by securing indestructible onto our commander in a very difficult way to interact with. Then we also have Stonehoof Chieftain, which will give our creatures trample and indestructible when they attack, and good old One Eye, a new creature from Warhammer that will also give our creatures trample, but also makes a 5/5 when it enters and can be recurred from the graveyard. And lastly, I want to point to Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, our deck's only planeswalker that will allow us to cast creatures at flash speed, but more importantly giving them vigilance and reach, and of course, Heroic Intervention to secure our entire board state against our opponent's pesky removal. Which, speaking of removal, we also, of course, are running some aside from our Sisters of Stone Death, so let's take a look at that. Now, we've already gone over the fact that the Sisters of Stone Death are in and of themselves a walking removal spell, plus Hythonia the Cruel and Kindred Dominance. But I do want to talk about Gaze of Granite. This is a 2 black and a green for an X spell that reads, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less. This card is incredibly useful as our deck spends the early turns just ramping in lands, so we can cast this for low mana to deal with the board early if we want to, and at low cost to ourselves. Or we can pay this big late game and still keep things like our commander around since she's 8 mana. And it's very rare that we're facing any other permanents that are going to be costing as much as our commander. In addition, we have some on-site removal spells like Beast Within, Assassin's Trophy, and Putrefy to deal with problems at instant speed. And I want to cover Silklash Spider, a 5 mana 2/7 with reach that has an activated ability that reads, pay 2 green and X, Silklash Spider deals X damage to each creature with flying. Not only does this give us an additional blocker for flying, which our deck does have a weakness to, it also pairs incredibly well with our AoE Death Touch or Lifelink effects, allowing us to pay X to either wipe our opponent's boards of their flyers and gain huge swaths of life, or we can leave it up and have a nice little blocker. In addition, there's 2 other spells that I want to talk about before we finish up this deck tech. The first is Beacon of Unrest, which we'll use to recur our high mana creatures when they get removed. And lastly is Majestic Genesis. This is a 8 mana sorcery costing 6 and 2 green. However, it reads, reveal the top X cards of your library where X is the greatest mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. You may put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Our commander is 8, meaning we are paying 8 to look at the top 8. That is insane value off of Majestic Genesis. This can put lands into play, creatures into play, our artifacts, our enchantments, everything we're running basically. It's insane value. I think this card is completely slept on. I understand why it's not in a lot of decks, but it absolutely has a home in this one. Alrighty, y'all, that brings us to the end of the deck tech. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know that the Sisters of Stone Death are not a super popular commander or one people even really think about when you think about Golgari commanders even, but I think that's exactly why I just had to do a deck tech for them. I love Gorgons, I love bad bitches, and they are both, and they are also more importantly, a commander that you don't see a lot. And I think one of the most fun parts of Commander is when people sit down and you get a cool variety of commanders every time you play. And the Sisters of Stone Death always bring variety to the table. So I hope you guys play with them and enjoy them, and let me know what you think about the deck. Let me know any edits you would make to it, anything I missed, especially with the new sets coming up. I appreciate y'all for watching, and that's it. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.